For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jasmine, and yeah, I know, the most exciting part about me. I went to UCLA as a student. I majored in biology, and I minored in anthropology, yes. And I was in InterVarsity for all 4 of my student years, and now I'm here interning. I've been doing that for the past 2 years. I am a proud follower of Jesus, a proud South Asian American woman. Yeah, that's right, that was for Vincent. And of course, a very proud Bruin. So I was looking on my Facebook feed this morning, and you know how it gives those like little memory things? So I saw that exactly 6 years ago, I graduated from high school today. And that day I started preparing to move away from home for the first time to come here to UCLA. And I didn't know that here at UCLA would actually be where I would come to know Jesus and start my journey of becoming a follower of him. So before I came to college, though, actually, my view of Jesus was very different. When I think back to high school and remember what shaped the way I view religion and specifically Christianity, there are a few key memories that come to mind. And one in particular actually is from like one of my classes. I was taking this US government class, and it was the time of the year when we were looking at different Supreme Court cases. And up until that point, I hadn't really had many data points on what Christianity was, what Christians were like, who Jesus was. So this was actually kind of like my first sort of adult encounter with Christians. And so we were learning about this case called Snyder versus Phelps. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but yeah, that was the first time I heard about Westboro Baptist Church. I won't go into too much detail about it, but this particular case was looking at like whether this church should be protected under the First Amendment for the things that they said on their different picket signs, things like God hates the USA, thank God for 9/11, things like thank God for dead soldiers and don't pray for the USA. So with all the political stuff aside, this was one of my first exposures to Christianity and to the church, and it really shaped the way that I viewed them and the way that I viewed the God that they worship, which is Jesus. And this, of course, is a very extreme example, but I share this story to say that the way that we behave as Christians and treat people has a lot of influence, and it actually does shape the way that people view Jesus. And so sometimes Christians don't do the best job of reflecting who Jesus really is. And when I was talking about this with Leslie earlier, she compared it to the nailed it meme for like trying stuff on Pinterest and then you totally fail at it. So here are some examples I found. I didn't know about it until she told me, but they like are trying to make these really cute things, and then it's just nothing like what it's supposed to be. And this kind of can relate to Christians sometimes, because we know that Jesus is really awesome, but sometimes the way that his followers end up going about things are not as awesome. And I think that Jesus calls us to become more like him for our own sake and for the sake of our relationship with him, but also so that we can point others around us to him. We're called to have godly character and to respond to people the way that Jesus would, which is what we'll be talking about more tonight. And I think that the more we look deeply at the Bible and at the ministry of Jesus and the interactions that we have had with people, the better our picture is of what it actually looks like to reflect Jesus through our words and our actions. And so obviously, my view of Jesus didn't stay like what it was in high school. It did change, and that's why I'm here right now. because at UCLA through InterVarsity, I was able to study the Bible for the first time and get to know the real Jesus, who is a God who is not hateful and condemning, but one who came to lift people up, especially those who were hated and condemned and misunderstood by others. And today we're going to take a closer look at one of the stories that helped me actually learn what it means to follow Jesus and to see and hear and speak like him. And the story that we'll be looking at tonight comes from the book of Mark in the Bible, which most people in InterVarsity are very familiar with. But I invite you to have fresh eyes and be open to what God might show you that's new tonight, or even just a good reminder. So the passage that we'll be looking at tonight is Mark 5, verses 21 through 34. And I'll read that for us now. So it says, "When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.' So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, 'If I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed.' Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, 'Who touched my clothes?' 'You see the people crowding against you,' his disciples answered, 'and yet you can ask, "Who touched me?"' But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" So I'm going to pray for us again, and we'll go into this passage more. So we'll start first with the eyes. So in this story, there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of people who are present here too. It says that Jesus is surrounded by large crowds, probably hundreds of people. Literally speaking, there's a lot that Jesus is seeing. Yet there are two main people from this story that get highlighted. There's Jairus, and then there's this woman who has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. There are many differences between these two people, but a few important similarities too that I think may be the key to understanding what it means to have the eyes of Christ and to see people the way that he does. So first, let's take a look at Jairus. It says that he is a synagogue leader, and this is a role similar to a modern-day pastor. He played an important role in conducting services at the temple. He was a respected religious leader. He probably was doing okay financially with this job. And of course, on top of everything, he was a man, which meant that he automatically was entitled to more power than women at this time. Jairus is important, and he's seen. And our other main character here is not described as a leader or a religious figure of any sort. She is someone who is suffering from a chronic medical condition. And sure, there's physical pain and discomfort that she may be feeling that's very real. But that's not even the worst of it. She has done so much to try to cure this problem. She spent all that she had, is left with nothing, and her condition continues to get worse. And it doesn't end there, because in this time, a woman with a condition like this, with a discharge of blood, was not allowed in the temple. So for 12 long years, day after day, this woman was not allowed to worship God in the temple because she was considered unclean. The people around her believed that she was unworthy of being in the presence of God. And not only that, everyone probably avoided her because if they were to come in contact with her, the same thing would happen to them and they'd be considered unclean too. And of course, she's a woman, which means that with or without this medical condition and being considered unclean, she never had much power in the society to begin with. And this woman, you could say, is unimportant and unseen. So we have a temple leader and a temple reject. We have someone who is respected and someone who's shunned. We have a person who has stability, one that's poor. We have a man and a woman. But we also have two people here who are in need, two people who are desperate for Jesus to bring healing to their situations. We have two people who humble themselves before Jesus and fall at his feet. We have two people who put all their faith in Jesus. And with both these people, Jesus sees past the qualities that the world gets so caught up in focusing on. Jesus sees two faithful people who are seeking him for breakthrough in their desperate situations. He sees two people who humble themselves before him, and he sees the bleeding woman the same way he sees Jairus, even though she was unseen by most other people. And yeah, I think that we could agree Jesus was more accessible to Jairus than he was to this woman. Jairus is able to approach him directly, but this woman was probably crawling on the floor just so she could touch his garment. Though it's not as clear of a picture as this today, I believe that the same is true. Some people have easier access to Jesus than others do. And I don't know why that is, but I do strongly believe that we have a role to play in changing this. Jesus leveled the playing field by giving this woman the same attention that he gave to Jairus. And I believe that as followers of Jesus, that this means that we're called to do the same. We're called to not only pay attention to and share the goodness of Jesus with those who already have him pretty accessible to them. Of course, you should love each other, love those who come to small group with you and are here in the room for Catalyst. But don't forget those who have to work every evening to make their ends meet. Don't forget those who are Hindu or Muslim or Buddhist and don't think that this is a place for them or a place that they're welcome. Don't forget about your friend who has depression and is desperate to be in a space like this but don't have the strength to get here. Don't forget about the people who are going to parties trying to find their worth in that and haven't been told that they've always been worthy in Jesus' eyes. Friends, we're called to be the eyes of Jesus that see these people on the outside and give them our attention. And I can guarantee you that there are people around each of you and around me who can relate to this woman, people who experience rejection and get overlooked because of the labels that are placed on them. We, as followers of Jesus, are called to see people the way that he does and to see the unseen. And so, like I was saying earlier, I didn't have a very positive view of Christians when I came into college. And I would never have imagined that I could ever be a Christian, partly because I didn't think that they were the best people from my prior knowledge, but also largely due to the fact that pretty much every Christian that I'd ever met up until that point was either white, black, or Latino. I had never met another South Asian Christian in my whole life. I legit thought that they didn't exist. It was like finding a unicorn. And I would say that for most of my life, Jesus wasn't very accessible to me. And it's not that I didn't want to know who Jesus was or was like intentionally trying to avoid him, but I just never really had the chance to. Because before I came to UCLA and met people in InterVarsity, no one had invited me to church or shared with me about who Jesus is or about how he had moved in their lives. And I wasn't just going to show up at a church because, truthfully, I didn't know that I could do that. No one had ever told me that Jesus is actually for me too. All I had known was like the Hindu temples and festivals and traditions that I'd grown up with. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for the leaders in Dykstra my freshman year who wanted to change that and offer me access to know Jesus more. And as we talked more, they saw my curiosity to learn about Jesus. And they showed me who he was through their friendship, their generosity, their joy. And of course, they showed me who he was through looking at the Bible with me for the first time. And I'm so glad that they didn't just look at my Hindu background and think that Jesus wasn't for me like I did to myself. And this bleeding woman didn't think that Jesus' healing power was for her. That's why she sneaks up behind him, thinking that she's actually stealing it from him. Yet Jesus still blesses her with what she was seeking and with more beyond that too. And I think that we are called to be Christians who are more like Jesus in this way, who see the bits of faith and humility in unexpected people and respond to it. And so I'm going to ask you to take just a moment to yourself and think, are there people that you tend to overlook, whether it's like specific people or just groups of people in general? Or on the flip side, are you someone who does feel overlooked? And I think that if you do, Jesus wants to show you that he does see you, and I invite you to continue pressing into that tension. So yeah, just take a minute to think about that. And now we'll move on. So next, we'll take a look at the ears. So yeah, regardless of how high and respected Jairus is and how low and overlooked this woman is, Jesus plans to give them both the healing that they're seeking. And in verse 29, we see that Jesus does indeed show up for this woman, even if she doesn't think that he noticed her. We see here that she gets healed of her disease. And at this point, it would totally make sense for Jesus to just continue going through the crowd in order to get to Jairus' daughter, who is literally dying. In the passage, it says that she's at the point of death. And if there were ever a time to be in a rush, it's probably now. But Jesus doesn't just run off from the scene, even though everyone expected Jesus to just keep going. The people in the crowd, the disciples, and probably this woman too, who's just been healed. She trusted that just touching the cloth that was touching Jesus' body was enough to heal her. And she actually just wanted to escape without everyone noticing her. But Jesus stops, and he calls out and asks who touched him. And this woman, this embarrassed but grateful woman, comes forward and reveals that it was her. And it says she told him the whole truth. And I don't know about you, but the whole truth sounds like it could be a pretty long story. 12 years of suffering, the many doctors that she visited, and the healing that she continued to seek, but only grew worse from. It's a pretty long story, and it would have been really easy for Jesus to continue just going and to keep walking after she got healed. That would have been way more efficient for him to do. But we see here in this story that Jesus is interruptible. He's willing to lay down his plans for a moment just to listen to someone. And this is one of the qualities that I admire the most about Jesus, because so many of Jesus's most powerful miracles and ministry happen in moments like this, in the in-between moments when Jesus is traveling and someone approaches him and asks him for help. And I think that as followers of Jesus, we're called to be interruptible too, like he is. And I know that some of you are thinking, but Jasmine, I'm so busy. And I completely believe you and agree with you. You all have so much going on with your classes and clubs and just like hanging out with people and having friends and the life. But look at who we're studying in this passage, Jesus, right? If anyone had an insane mission and hopes and plans, it's him. He came to preach the good news to people, but I challenge you to imagine if Jesus only preached in synagogues. The Gospel of Mark would only be like 2 chapters long. It was in those unplanned and unexpected moments on the path to another place that Jesus moved and spoke so powerfully. And in the story, Jesus had great things to say, and he does say them later on. But first, he gives this woman space to talk. And I think a lot of us in this room, including myself, have room to grow in learning how to listen well and being interruptible. A few weeks ago, one of the pastors at my church shared that he doesn't think people are as good at listening anymore because we're preoccupied with so many different things. And I kind of agree with that. In a world that is ruled by efficiency, it doesn't make much sense to stop when you're doing something to listen to someone share their story. And I think that listening to others isn't really seen as the best use of our time, especially when it's people who don't have that much influence. And adding on to this, I think another thing that makes it even more difficult for us to listen is just social media and the dependence that we have on technology and on our phones. Think about the last time you ate a meal or caught up with someone and just shut your phone off and put it away. I think technology has led us to a life that feels a lot more urgent than it is. And I think we actually do have room to grow in just being able to sit with someone and listen to them. And so I ask you, will you be someone who allows yourself to be interrupted? Will you be someone who leaves open spaces in your GCal and prays that the Holy Spirit will use you in those times to move in people's lives? And I just want to say this doesn't mean that we have to sit to hear every person's whole story all the time. Jesus didn't do this for every single person he came in contact with, but with this woman, he knew that it was something that she needed for her deeper healing. And I think the invitation here is to discern with God and to be obedient, to let people interrupt your plans once in a while when God does ask you to be available to listen and to care for someone in this way. And I can attest that there is great power in being a person who is interruptible and willing to listen. For me, sometimes the most loving thing people can do for me is just listen to me and what I'm going through. I'm grateful for my friends and mentors who are willing to make space to listen to me, to the things that frustrate me, anger me, convict me, bring me joy. I'm glad to have people who listen to me share about what Jesus is doing in my life. And I think about my freshman year small group leaders who remember, I remember them listening to me talk and cry about so many different things, like struggling with school, things with my family, things with my roommates, and about the growing relationship that I had with Jesus. They would make a lot of space for me to share, and they'd ask me questions to help me understand more deeply what I was going through. And then they'd share their senior wisdom with me as a little freshman. And I know that they had dozens of things that they could have been doing during this time, but it really meant the world to me that they would let me interrupt them for a few moments to just share. And now it actually brings me great joy when I get to be a good listener for other people, when I get to be someone who is willing to be a little spontaneous and spend time with someone who is searching for someone to listen. And truly, it's such a great way to let people know that they're loved and that they're known, that they're appreciated and that they're important to you and to Jesus. And recently, I've felt really affirmed too for having this gift of being someone who's just able to be present with people. I think, even though I'm growing in it, I'm realizing that it can be very powerful to just be with people for the sake of being with them. And I think that if we allow a little interruption in our lives, we can see beautiful things happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. We've talked about the eyes and the ears. We've observed the ways that Jesus sees and hears the bleeding woman and her story. And lastly, I actually want to talk about the mouth of Jesus, even though it wasn't part of my assigned topic, but that's fine. We can see that I'm interruptible. What can I say? we can see that in this passage, Jesus only says a few words, but they hold so much weight. And Jesus was a well-known rabbi with a lot of influence, and he had the power to bring real and lasting change through his words. So what are the things that Jesus chooses to say here, and what is the impact that his words have? First, after the bleeding woman touches Jesus' clothes, he says, "Who touched me?" And even the disciples think that he's being ridiculous as they're all walking through crowds of people together where literally everyone is touching him. But Jesus doesn't say this because he doesn't know who touched him. He says it because he wants the woman to reveal that it was her. If she just touched him, got healed, and walked away, she wouldn't be fully healed. Physically, yes, but emotionally, probably not. And in the eyes of everyone else around her, probably not. She didn't really have an illness that people could visibly see, so maybe they just think that she was lying if she came back and said that she was magically healed. Jesus calls her out in front of this large crowd, not to embarrass her or to shame her, but to heal her in a more complete way. Jesus straight up calls this woman out, but he 100% does it out of love for her and the purpose of bringing restoration. Shortly after Jesus listens to this woman's story, he says these words, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." And these words are so powerful. I love that Jesus calls this woman daughter because that's such an intimate relationship. And this woman had not experienced intimacy in 12 years because of her illness. But by saying this, Jesus is saying that she is worthy of it. She's worthy of intimacy. And he's saying that she isn't just some insignificant woman, but she's someone that he wants to associate himself with. He says that her faith has healed her. And she's been called nothing but unclean for over a decade. But Jesus calls her faithful. He tells her to go in peace and be freed from her suffering. Not just her physical suffering, but all of her suffering. The mental, emotional, spiritual, and relational too. Jesus declares her healed and he declares her clean out loud so that everyone knows it. So that she can actually have her life back and be freed from her suffering once and for all. And I think a lot of times we can be so afraid to be called out, not wanting to own up to what we've done or are doing because we don't want to be shamed for it. But I think we all need friends and people in our lives who will call us out, not to condemn us or shame us, but out of love for us and with the purpose of seeing Jesus bring restoration to our lives. I'm so grateful for the friends who love me enough to actually call me out when I'm doing things that are harming me or harming other people or causing me to stray from what Jesus calls me to. For example, I'm someone who has a pretty unhealthy habit of complaining. And of course, everyone deserves to have a little rant once in a while to get things off their chest. But for me, I can easily find a way to complain about pretty much anything. My job, my family, the weather, the bumps in the sidewalk that I always trip over. Literally anything, I could complain about it. But I'm glad that I have people in my life who call me out when I do it too much. And they don't do it because they're judging me, I think, or want me to feel bad, but because they know that when I'm focusing on these small things that are annoying me and I don't like, I'm missing out on all the good things that are all around and the good things that Jesus is doing. And honestly, this call to be someone who speaks out of love can be so challenging for me, especially when it comes to my family. And I would say that I'm typically a pretty chill person, usually able to remain calm and respond with understanding and compassion. But for some reason, when it comes to my family, all of that goes out the window. They somehow always find the ways to push all of my buttons. And a lot of the time, this leads me to speak to them out of anger or frustration or judgment or pretty much anything but love. But I know that it's very important that I grow to continue becoming someone who speaks out of love, especially with my family. They're not followers of Jesus, and I know that the things that I say and do have a large impact on the way that they view him. I want them to know that they are loved deeply by me and by Jesus, and that means that it's important for me to speak words of love towards them, not condemnation and not shame. And it's important that I let Jesus shape me to become more like him in this way. We are called to speak out of love to the people around us, whether they're our close friends or relatives, or just strangers who we interact with for a moment. This doesn't mean that we don't ever call people out, but it means that we do it out of love and nothing else, not to embarrass, not to place blame or shame, not to bring pain or to evoke anger. We can either lean towards being afraid to do it because we don't want to offend or hurt people, or we can go in the opposite direction and impulsively speak out of judgment or anger. But if we follow Jesus' example here, then the invitation is to bring up the difficult things with our friends and family, like when they fall into cycles of sin or don't walk with integrity or displaying behaviors that are harmful to them or to others. It's not loving for us to let them continue walking away and not being able to experience the fullness of the freedom that Jesus has for them from these burdens. The loving thing to do is to bring it up, but always out of a place of wanting better for them. We are not meant to allow others to remain in their brokenness to avoid conflict or awkwardness. We're meant to be people who expose these broken areas to Jesus with them, so that he can bring freedom and healing and restoration. And we're called, as followers of Jesus, to be people who speak in love. So at the start of this talk, I shared about one of my first encounters with Christians and how it shaped my view of them and of Jesus. The way that we see and hear and speak to people around us are things that really matter. And I hope we can all agree that our faith in Jesus is about more than just our personal beliefs, but that it's meant to be lived out by showing Christ's love through our actions as well. So now I want to give you all a chance to respond to this word and ultimately to the things that the Holy Spirit is stirring up in you. So right now I'll give 2 different calls to respond to this message. So if this talk makes you feel like there's something in your life that needs to change, or you're just really seeking to become more like Jesus in this way, I want to bless you into that. And so for the first group of people, if you have a desire to grow and need Jesus to help you see, hear, or speak to people the way that he does, then this is for you. So could you please stand so I can pray for you? So I think the worship team will come up and give you all some time to be with Jesus and to interact with him over these things. And I'll share just a couple more invitations. So if you stood up for the first call, I have these little card things up here, and I'd like you to come grab one and keep it for yourself. And these are just like very simple prayers of, Jesus, help me to see the unseen, help me to be interruptible, help me to, what's the last one? To speak with love. Because I think that we can try to do these things on our own, but that only lasts so long, and we can only go so far on our own. And for a transformation that will really last, we need to have it come through Jesus. So if you stood up, you can come up during this response time and pick it up, just to keep it as a reminder to keep these things, these ways that you want to grow and become more like Jesus in your prayers. And if you stood up for the second call, I want to encourage you to get some prayer from the different prayer ministers who will be in the back. These folks are willing to listen, and they want to be the ears of Jesus to you. And they want to help you bring this pain that you're feeling directly to Jesus alongside you. So I invite you to take advantage of this resource to get some prayer for yourself. And I think that's it.